Ireland is the place where whiskey found its name. The home of whiskey distilling, the country that has produced whiskey for longer than anywhere else. Irish whiskey is defined by its people and places. The craftsmanship of our distillers and blenders. Our celebrated home on the island of Ireland, on the very edge of Europe, where the continent meets the roar of the Atlantic Ocean. Irish whiskey has a depth and diversity unrivaled among other whiskies, many unique characters, but one shared spirit. There's always a new Irish whiskey brand or expression to savour, on the shelves of your off-licence, liquor store and online. Discover the depth and diversity of Irish whiskey.
Good evening, everybody. You're all very welcome. So from wherever you're from, we hope you're safe and well, and thank you for joining us. So this is the first in a brand new and exciting series done in collaboration with the Irish Whiskey Association and brought to you by Irish Whiskey Magazine, the title of which is Discover Irish Whiskey. So at the series, we're going to be joined by a prominent group of experts and brands from within the industry, a cross-section of the industry, both small and large, and really we'll be exploring what Irish whiskey really is as a category. And hopefully now we'll get some great insights from the panelists and see what makes Irish whiskey so special and such an adored product throughout the world. To help me in the podcast, I'm joined by veteran and whiskey expert John Cashman. And for those that don't know John is a former global brand ambassador, a whiskey expert who's helped develop brands and portfolios, product development, and has been an international judge for Irish whiskey. So I think the best thing is just to welcome in John.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, John.
Hey, Sergius. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm still trying to get used to this veteran tag that's been put on
young
me
veteran.
But anyway, young veteran. Yeah, I might look it, but I don't feel it. Anyway, no, look, thanks, Sergius, for that. And also I'd like to thank the Irish Whiskey Association for inviting me to help participate in these series of talks. I'm really looking forward to some of the things we have lined up over the next few weeks. And I think we have really, we've really started with a bang with our guests for this first episode. I was just thinking there beforehand. I think our three guests probably have a combined experience of almost 100 years working with whiskies over the course of their careers. At our three guests, Sarah Dowling is the distiller and blender for Beam Suntory's Irish whiskies. She is based in the Cooley Distillery in County Louth, and Sarah is responsible for all Beam Suntory Irish whiskies. And these Hi, Sarah. These come out of both the Cooley Distillery and the Kilbeggan Distillery. And some of the brands that some of you might have heard of over the years that Sarah has full responsibility for today are the Kilbeggan and the recent Kilbeggan pot still and rye, a small batch rye. Also old iconic brands like the Tyrconnell single malt and of course Connemara peated single malt Irish whiskey. Billy Leighton then has probably one of the most enviable jobs, not just in Ireland, but I think around the world in the whiskey industry. As chief blender to Irish Distillers Pernod Ricard, Billy has access to some of the most iconic and valuable whiskies in Ireland. A Whiskey Magazine Hall of Fame inductee and Irish Whiskey Association Chairman's Award recipient. Billy has been at the forefront of the resurgence of Irish whiskey over the past few years. Softly spoken, yet fiercely passionate about the Irish whiskey category in general, but pot still category in particular. I personally I'm really looking forward to some of Billy's insights into the unique nature of this spirit that we all love. And our third guest this evening is a man I've known for probably 15 years, both as a colleague and as a friend. Like Billy, a Whiskey Magazine Hall of Famer and Irish Whiskey Association Chairman's Award winner, Noel Sweeney, through his early work with Cooley Distillery in the 80s and 90s, really revolutionized the way Irish whiskey was to be seen, not just in Ireland, but around the world, with the concept of maybe reintroducing double distillation to Ireland and the use of peated malt again for Irish whiskey. And of course, Noel was very much one of the people that brought single grain as a standalone category into Irish whiskey. Today, Noel is master distiller at the beautiful Powerscourt Distillery in my home county, the Garden of Ireland, County Wicklow. And there he brings his decades of experience to bear on one of the newer entrants into the vista of Irish whiskey. All three of you, you are very welcome to tonight's episode. One of the things that I noticed when Sergios and myself were discussing this particular episode is, although you were all in relatively similar roles within your organizations, you had very contrasting and varying paths to get there. Firstly, Sarah, I know you started your career working in Scotland, working with some Scottish distillers. So could you give us a feel for how that came about and when you got sense and decided to return to Ireland to work on the real whiskey?
So I'm actually from, my hometown is Athlone. So ironically, like 20 minutes down the road from Kilbeggan Distillery, but to get to work there, I moved over to Edinburgh, to University of Edinburgh. I did my undergraduate degree over there in genetics, of all things. So still not related to whiskey, but we'll get there. And I ended up getting one of the first jobs that I kind of ended up taking after I graduated, after traveling a little bit, came back to Edinburgh, or came back to Scotland, and I got a job in environmental management for a large Scotch whiskey company, and really didn't know a huge amount at the time about whiskey or Scotch whiskey. And I remember arriving on my first day and getting a tour of the blending and bottling site in Glasgow, and just thinking, wow, this industry is amazing. And I was on a 15-month contract, and I just remember saying to myself, just while you're here, just learn as much as possible. You might never get this opportunity again. And on the tour, the girl who gave me the tour told me that there was, the blender ran a sensory panel, and if your nose was good enough, you could sit on the panel and help out with new product development or customer complaints or something like that. So day 2, I knocked on the door of the blender's office and said, "Hi, I'm Sarah. Can I be on your panel, please?" And she, just knowing now how difficult it is to get people to step away from their desks to join your panel, I think she was just delighted to have someone that was engaged in it. And it really took it from there, just moved more into operational roles as time went on, always trying to engage as much as possible with the blenders and the blending panels and the sensory side of it, just out of just interest. And bid my time until the dream job came up, and I'll always thank my lucky stars for Noel Sweeney when he decided to make a move. So that's the journey. Yeah, just kind of a little bit convoluted, just following interests and following passions.
No, brilliant. But I mean, at least you had a science background when you started off. I mean, that's quite different to where Billy came from, where Billy was really, I suppose, swapping balance sheets for blending. So, Billy, can you give us a little introduction to how that came about, accountancy to blending?
Yeah, dead right, John. That's 8th of November 1976 is a date that sticks in my mind. That was whenever I joined Irish Distillers at Bushmills Distillery when it was still part of the group. As a humble trainee accountant. So I mean, I stayed in the finance end for 12 years, and it was about around about 1988. A surprise opportunity came up within Bushmills to move into, or well, not to move, to help out on the production side because they just needed help. They were short-handed all of a sudden, and I volunteered, and seemed to work out. I didn't go back into the accounts office anyway. So, and over time, like the exposure to more and more roles within the distilling production opened up for me. So I was able to get experience over a good number of years, and really working on Bushmills brands at the time under the instruction of the then chief blender, the late Dr. Barry Walsh.
Yeah.
So would have been taking instructions from Barry. Then around about 2003, Barry indicated his intention to retire, and again, I just feel that I was lucky, and I was in the position that Barry seemed to think that I was the person that could follow on in his footsteps. He wasn't a tall man in stature. He wasn't big in stature, but like they were big boots to fill.
Definitely.
At that time. So I was given 24 hours to decide whether I wanted to be deputy chief blender or not. I didn't really need 24 hours, but
easy decision.
I kept them waiting overnight anyway. So I took that role and worked with Barry. Took on the wider portfolio. Then worked with Barry for a year. He retired in 2004, and I became then chief blender for Irish Distillers. Then, out of the blue, in 2005, Bushmills suddenly left the Irish Distillers group, and that put me in a bit of a quandary, because although I was blender for Irish Distillers, I was still based in Bushmills. So the decision had to be made. Where do you go? Do you stay or do you go? And that was it. And I was given best advice from many directions that Irish Distillers was the place that the future lay.
What a decision to make! Yeah, brilliant.
And it didn't cross my mind at the time, because say that whole business deal came right out of the blue.
Yeah.
And I was involved to a degree in how the stocks were going to be divided, and so it was really focused in on that, and didn't have any idea of how it was going to affect my life from there on, because I'm sitting in Portstewart now. I don't know if anybody knows Portstewart. It's right on the north coast, and it's about 10 miles from Bushmills, and that was my commute every morning, just a long 15-minute drive along sort of one of the most spectacular parts of the coast of Ireland. Yeah, and now my commute is 320 miles down the road to Middleton. But anyway, and that's how I come to be.
I know it's definitely worked out. It's worked out for you. That's no doubt about that. And Noel, as a proud Roscommon man, you've had significantly more success with whiskey over the past few years than your football team has had. But having started with Chemicky Cho, and some might say, the early years of Cooley were some people would refer to them perhaps as unconventional. So your path, although being quite conventional, maybe what was going on in Cooley might have been perceived as unconventional. Can you talk about some of those early years and how you got from like government alcohol plant to a whiskey maker?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a long time ago now, and but I must correct you on one thing. I'm a Ballahadreen man, and
Right, on the border.
The Ballahadreen boys shout from me all. And we've had a little
now
bit
you
more
upset them.
perhaps, but yeah, and it is a bit of a bone of contention down in Ballahadreen as to whether you're Mayo or Roscommon, and why is that? Because it's firmly rooted inside Roscommon, but that's a whole story we don't want to get into.
So that's not the time.
I guess I started off in the industry, I suppose, when I joined Chemical Churnt in 1978, and I joined in Ballina in the glucose plant making glucose syrup. But there was also an alcohol division in the company at that stage, and I moved over to that in early 1979. And I was stationed in Cooley for a little while. They had a big enough neutral spirit and absolute alcohol distillation system. And we also had a smaller plant up in Carndonagh in Donegal. And I got posted up there for about 6 months. And my background was in analytical chemistry from Sligo Regional College. I wanted to get into science, I guess. And so I was a lab technician when I joined Chemical Churnt, and I set up a lab in Carndonagh to monitor the fusel and the various bits and pieces we put in a GC. And Billy probably remembers a guy called Kevin McNamara. Kevin and I worked together in Chemical Churnt, and Kevin was the chemist, and he moved a few years later to join Irish Distillers and had a great career in the lab in Middleton, and a real interesting character was Kevin. But anyway, after Chemical Churnt was kind of put into voluntary liquidation, I think in 1983 or 86, sorry, for various reasons, and I'm not going to go into them here, but I moved into a small chemical plant over in Galway, making food flavors and pharmaceutical intermediaries in a pilot plant situation, and then that we brought that to full production in Athlone. And then an opportunity came up when John Teeling started making whiskey over in Cooley, and he had a lab, and he had very little experience in analytical techniques for the neutral spirits that they had, and some absolute alcohol, and they were producing all kinds of methylated spirits for the domestic market, and even for the likes of the hand sanitizers that we do now. It was from Chemical that those spirits had come. So long story short, I ended up joining Cooley as quality manager in 1989, the 26th of June. I remember it very, very well. And that was where I started getting involved in whiskey. And I had a whiskey distiller there from Scotland, because it was very difficult to extract anybody out of the Irish whiskey distillation scene at the time, because, again, there were just the two mills and, of course, Middleton. So the first distiller was there for about 6 or 7 months, and we hired another guy called Gordon Mitchell. Alan Jappy was the guy's name, the first distiller in Cooley. And then Gordon joined us in 1990 when we started the grain plant. And they were that's one of the reasons as well why we started on double distilling. We didn't have any experience in triple distilling, and there was no legal definition as to why you would have to distill 3 times, even though for about 20, 30, 40, 50 years before that, it was the mantra of Irish whiskey was it was double distilled or triple distilled, excuse me, Billy, and it was repeated. And that was great because it differentiated Irish whiskey from some other ones, our closest neighbours, for example. And that's how Irish whiskey started to grow in as well, because it was a very special product. And John Teeling saw the opportunity in Irish whiskey, I believe, because there was a monopoly. And where there's a monopoly, there's an opportunity. And John, being the entrepreneur that he is, he could see a good thing when he saw it. And that's how he got involved. And I got involved, as I say, I needed a job. And the job was quality manager. And I I enjoyed the distilling side of alcohol business from chemical. The chemical industry is great, but it's a different animal altogether. You need the different skills. While I enjoyed the time I was there, it wasn't for me. I preferred to get back into the more simpler chemistry of making alcohol. A little that I know. Anyway, I learned a lot from Gordon Mitchell in particular. He was our first distiller. He stayed with us until 1995, when he left and joined the Isle of Arran distillery in Scotland. And of course, the reason that I think Gordon left was Cooley was always looked at needing a bigger partner. And we had looked for various people to join the company to expand and do the sales and marketing of brands. We never had enough money really to do that. And we had a couple of failed attempts at that for various reasons. But in 1993, it was Irish Distillers who kicked the whole thing off, because we were just about to launch our first whiskey, and Irish Distillers put in an offer to buy Cooley, and that was in October, and by March the competition authority threw it out for good reason. It was again a monopoly coming back, and they didn't want that. So that's when we started to launch our whiskies, and we didn't have the money to market whiskey. We didn't just have that cash that you need to go out and have people on the streets. And there was an opening with the supermarket in the UK and around the world, because they were their own market. They had a visible market, or people in the stores every day and any day, and their own brands were actually big names, the likes of Marks and Spencer's, Sainsbury's, Waitrose, and all the rest of them, from Dunn's to Super Value. Cooley ended up supplying them with their own labelled Irish whiskey, and this is where they got the cash flow to maintain and grow the business in those early years. But that was a great headache for me, because when Gordon left, myself and David Hines, who was the chemical engineer and general manager or managing director at that stage, were left in charge of the plant and running the distillery. And during my time in Cooley also, even though I had a background in chemistry, I always had an interest in computers. I did a degree in IT, and and that helped me. And you seem to bemused by the fact that Billy was an accountant, but when you get into blending, it's all about the numbers, and it's all about balancing and about getting strategy, and using the stock that you have and getting the best out of the stock that you have. And that's one of the key aspects of blending. So it's a very natural thing for an accountant, because he can see, I've got so many barrels of this and so many containers of that, and you have to get them all used eventually. And so my IT background helped me build a stock system, control system for the stocks in Cooley. And I went on then to do a master's in quality management. And that was I called a halt then, I think, at that side of the education. But all along you were learning. And you talked about people like Barry Walsh. I mean, I got offered a job actually by Kevin and Barry once down to join them down in not in Middleton. I think that's probably why I didn't go, but down in Washford. And that would have been when I was still in chemistry. And later on, I had a great pleasure working with Barry in a collaboration with C&C when they owned the Tullamore Dew brand, and we ourselves in Cooley and C&C brought out the Tullamore 10-year-old single malt, and that was
malt. Yes, I remember that. Yeah,
a great learning for me as well, because to work with someone like Barry was a real pleasure and an honor. And I have fond memories of him, and the days that we spent milling over the different whiskies that we had laid down to see what was the best blend to come up with. And but it was great. And I had a lot of pleasure.
Sorry, Noel. Just something you said there, and I just maybe want to put it out there. I mean, you're talking about the facts and the figures and the numbers and blending. And something Sarah said as well, the nose and the analysis. I mean, is there something within the Irish whiskey blending that is different to other places? Or is that something that, like some of the best blenders around the world, are essentially doing the same thing? I mean, is there anyone who wants to maybe have a stab at that?
What I would say about that is, you can only make a blend out of the materials that you have in the warehouse.
Yeah.
So, it depends on the diversity that you put into your warehouse. It will depend on the outcomes. So the likes of cask finishing and all of that, we can see people that have done that. And, there was the great tradition of maturing whiskey in sherry casks. And that was something very important in Ireland and across the world and in Scotland. And then there was a kind of change that came along. And these were the kind of learnings that I took along the way when I joined the International Wine and Spirits competition as a judge for whiskey. And it was a great opportunity to see what's out there, blind tasting all of these fabulous whiskies and learn. And kind of, I found it very important every year to go back and recalibrate the nose and recalibrate the thinking and see what other people are doing and bring that home. And that's how we ended up doing things like the Connemara and the likes of the Tyrconnell Madeira finishes and ports and those kind of wine finishes or sherry. And again, you talk about innovation. We did double distilling because, like I said at the start, it wasn't really anything else that we knew at the time, and we had to learn then eventually what was involved in triple distilling. And the grain whiskey side of things again was something new to us. I think in Scotland we would have said that most people would put grain spirit new make into rather what I would call tired casks, that they don't give an awful lot of flavor in the cask because they want to reuse the cask as many times as possible, and they always considered the blends that the flavor in the blends came from their classic malt distilleries, and the grain was literally, and still is in a lot of cases, used as a thinner. But Cooley didn't have the pleasure or the of having second fill casks. We had to buy new casks the whole time, so we were buying in a lot of bourbon. So our grain went into fresh AB1s, and the development of it was absolutely fabulous.
Yeah.
And again, the other thing that Cooley had, we made all of our whiskies of the early years. We had built up a lot of stock, and it had grown in age much quicker than you expect. Time doesn't change, but we suddenly realized, oh my God, we've got 8-year-old grain here and a goddamn lot of it. So we needed somewhere to get rid of it, and it tasted absolutely fabulous, and that's where the Green Ore came out. And subsequently the 15-year-old grains and all the rest of them, and
won all the awards.
Grain whiskey made, especially with maize. Again, the other thing, the guys in Scotland were using a lot of wheat, which does a different character of whiskey. And matured in bourbon like that, it's just a phenomenal drink.
So I think, just to follow on from that, and I mean, Noel's talking about all the variables that there are out there, and I think what we all have in common, and blenders throughout the world in the whiskey business, is that it's the sensory side, is discerning aromas and flavors, and figuring out where these flavors are coming from, and it could be the cask. We can argue all day, is it the cask or is it the distillate? But there's so much coming from the distillate. There's so much coming from the casks, and whenever you Noel's talking about first fill bourbons, and whenever you go on to the next cycle, the second fill bourbon, you're getting a completely different flavor character, flavor profile even from a third fill. And I know, as Noel was saying there, maybe in Scotland they tend to keep those first fill casks for their malts. Maybe use them 3 times there, and then you might get a 4th, a 5th, or a 6th fill cask filled with grain. And it's debatable. I don't think we would be doing anything like that, because maybe from the Irish distillers' point of view, because we're all triple distilled, the distillate does tend to be a little bit lighter in flavor profile, and therefore we depend an awful lot on what the cask contributes. So cycling the cask 3 times is about its limit for us, but in each of those 3 cycles, whether it be ex-bourbon cask or ex-sherry cask, ex-port, whatever, you are starting to build up a kind of a palette of flavors and aromas that we can then take away and use as blenders to put together and play tunes and make all the different products, different brands, the different styles that we have.
And just a question I might have there, and maybe Sarah might be able to help us on this in terms of world whiskey and looking at how your roles maybe are different in Ireland to abroad. Do Irish blenders and do yourselves, is there a larger palette to choose from, or are we, is there a common palette, or is it just a wider range that we can actually choose from?
So I'm not sure if this is related, but hearing your responses and that question, I was thinking back to the last time I was in Kentucky visiting our bourbon sites. I went for dinner with some of my colleagues, my Beam Suntory colleagues that I work with. Normally remotely, we went for dinner one evening. There was 4 blenders sitting around the table. We all ordered cocktails, and as soon as they arrived, we were all tasting each other's drinks and we were discussing the different flavor notes. And then the dinner arrived and everyone was trying each other's food. Very pre-COVID behavior. It was almost like you're kind of you're amongst people that kind of are as interested in these geeky kind of, sensory kind of tasting as you are, that it is a universal thing. It's a universal interest. And even when you're off duty, just having the chats, that's the default. So probably quite similar people. And then do we have a larger palette to choose from? As in, do you think Irish whiskey has...
Well, we have the double distill, we have triple distill, we have the pot still, we have the grains, we have we have the ability to use different woods. We have a wide variety of casks available to us. And then, of course, we have a very fertile land in terms of producing great quality barley.
Absolutely. And it's about how you express yourselves as well as blenders and distillers, and kind of there's so many different ways to innovate these days as well across, so many different distilleries. So I think that's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out over the next couple of years. I think the flavors are kind of, the diversity is yet really to be explored properly.
Yeah,
I would have to totally agree with Sarah there, and I think one of the advantages that we have in our regulations, they do allow different wood types, and I think there's quite a lot of exploration still to be done there. I know at Irish Distillers we've done some released some different wood types under Method and Madness, and I think it kind of pushes the boundaries, not only for us as blenders when we're putting these together, but I think it pushes the boundaries a little bit for the consumer as well. I mean, my mind goes straight to Method and Madness, the wild cherry pot still that we did. Now it was the wood itself was really, really potent flavor contributor, and we had some failures with that before we kind of figured out how to handle it and have something that we were happy with, and thankfully whenever we did the launch of it was accepted readily and had some very good critical reviews. So that's in Ireland. I mean, Scotland, they're a little bit more restricted from the cask, the cask point of view, using only oak. But then in other other territories, Canada, for example, where they're actually allowed to add to their whiskey, to add flavorings, things like that. So there's, I think there's diversity available to the producers wherever they happen to be producing, I think our main one at the minute is the wood. I think once we've tried one different wood type, that was the chestnut was the first one that we released. It was widely accepted, no pushback at all by anybody, and that kind of opened the doors for all the other Irish producers to try different wood types. And I think, like, you can agree or disagree that Irish distillers have done a lot of the trailblazing for the category up until now, and hopefully all the new entrants and the younger entrants in the category can benefit from that.
Yeah. I suppose one of the things that I'd really like to get to the crux of, we're talking about Irish whiskey and what makes Irish whiskey unique. I mean, there's probably not one single factor, but with the diversity and the amount of innovation and the taking place in the sector, would that be one of the factors that you think sets Irish whiskey aside from perhaps others?
And actually on that as well, has innovation come about because it was such a small industry? Insofar as the likes of Cooley, the likes of Irish Distillers, the likes of Bushmills had to innovate because there was no trading of liquids. There was nothing like that going on. So has it come about, just organically? Is it something that we as an industry always wanted to do, or we just had to in order to not go stale?
Yeah, I've a view on that, John, that I think it's something that we've had to do, just over the past 10 years, possibly. Whenever you look back, whenever you just had Irish Distillers, you had Cooley, Bushmills, you really only had a handful of producers out there, and they all had good, successful brands, and probably didn't think they needed to do anything differently because they had good brands that were working for them. Why do anything different? But now, whenever we've got so many new entrants into the category, everybody is bound to want to have their own style, have their own signature style, and I think that's forced, the more longer standing producers to sit up and take notice of what's going on.
And is that is that external competition, do you feel, or do you feel it's internal competition, I suppose, from the sense that we now have 39 working distilleries as opposed to 2 or 3 that we had? Or is it just trying to make a bigger mark in the world sector?
Yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, I think it's just it's just how we express ourselves. I think for the past definitely 10 to 5 years, we would have had to express ourselves more through cask finishes and things like that. But I've noticed a shift even in the past couple of years, and it's probably to do with, what you've been doing, so just as in getting the knowledge out there through your podcast and the Irish Whiskey magazine. Consumers are more interested in the technical. What kit are you using? What mash bill? What's where was it matured, and how many pot stills do you have? Questions that definitely weren't being asked 5 years ago. And I really think whiskey tourism is going to come into its own kind of throughout Ireland once we can move about again. People are going to want to taste. They're tasting kind of as they're watching, kind of as they're going through kind of the Twitter tastings and the YouTube tastings. They're going to want to see the distilleries and see where the differences are coming from. Why is a Cobegan taste different from a Powerscourt? I want to go and see the kit and see the plant. I think. Do you guys feel like that's kind of a bit of a shift in interest over the past couple of years?
Definitely. I mean, when you look at the recent history, and I'm talking about since about the 1990s to the 2000, 2010, and then 2010 to 2020, over those 30 years, the industry has changed so much. And we've learned so much as well from other categories. I mean, you take the boom in wine for example, when they started coming out with the shelf talkers for wine in the supermarkets and started telling you about the flavor of the wine and where the wine was coming from and the terroir and all these things, and you get the wine buffs and the sommeliers and all this kind of interest in wine, that started then to transgress into whiskey and Scotch and into the development of different flavor wheels and and sensory analysis and then, as you said, how in the name of God did we ended up with your colleagues there, Sarah, in Lafroig? That heavy peated whiskey was a big talker, but compared to all the others. And then Irish Distillers used to have a great whiskey tour. When you go in and you got a bourbon and an Irish and a Lafroig or something similar. It used to change, but I mean the differences. We were showing the differences in product and whiskies. And tourism is taking off. People are going around living and learning more, and knowledge is what they're all seeking. How do we do this? How did they do that? And I mean, it was always a great thing in the early years in Cooley when the visitors used to knock up at the gate and look for a tour. I spent a lot of time showing people around. It was ridiculous. It doesn't happen nowadays as much, unless you have an organised, proper health and safety tour. You remember those days, John?
Oh, I do.
We still get people at the gate looking for tours in Cooley Distillery. We have to say we're not a visitor centre.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, the whiskey fan now is far more discerning than they would have been. And younger.
We've been disseminating this knowledge around, and the whiskey, and the internet, and the tools that we have now for getting information to people are so much better. I mean, when I started originally, the amount of information that even the guys going out into the trade shows and the sales guys had, the mantra, the same story, and making sure that you had the right story. And that was key to the success of your brand. It might not always been 100% accurate, but at least they all had the same story. And it was, and it built the brand and the name, and it brought people into and it's all about the brand at the end of the day and getting the consumer to align with what you're trying to do with your brand.
Yeah, I think certainly. Go ahead, Billy.
Sorry, yeah, no, just to carry on from Noel there. Like the consumer is somebody that they're so important, and we would be consumer led. We're not trying to influence a consumer, and it's all down to the education. And Sarah and Noel have both said it's down to the knowledge that people just want. They get an interest in the product, and they want to know more and more. So it's the consumer at the end of the day that's keeping us all in business. So it's consumer led, really, and we have to be able to be agile enough to look at trends, see what's happening out there, and be able to react and produce something. The whiskey business is not something that I always say. The thing that you need most in the whiskey business is patience, but the consumer doesn't always have a lot of patience, so you have to be able to react as quickly as possible and get something out there that falls within the trend. And what we have at the minute, like we do have a changing sort of population of people that are drinking whiskey. I think the average age of the consumer is dropping. No doubt about it. The whiskey, there used to be a stereotypical whiskey drinker was an old guy sitting at the fireside smoking a pipe with a flat cap, and a glass of whiskey. And younger people now are really wanting to break with that stereotype, and so there's a whole new demographic there now interested in their whiskey.
I suppose that leads on to one question.
Sorry.
Ahead,
just to build on what Billy was saying, when I first started working in whiskey and Scotch, nearly 9 years ago now, the question I would get from my friends would be, "And do you like whiskey?" Like, yeah, I love it. Now I get, so right, what is a single malt? And what does double distilled mean? Like the questions that you're getting kind of over time has really evolved to be less like, what are you doing, Sarah? To more like, no, I want to know. I'm not sure where else to get this information. And that's when they need patience, because if you ask me what's single malt, you're going to be there for in an hour.
But I suppose one of the things that the consumer is demanding now is more transparency and more details on provenance. And are you finding that a hindrance, or is that an opportunity for you? And how do you tackle those requests that are coming in from the consumer?
I find that one a very interesting one, because it's this kind of consumer knowledge, and then you get into regulations as well. And we've all faced difficulties with labeling regulations at the moment, and people's understanding of what you're putting on the label as well. And within the industry, we take an awful lot for granted, and we realized that very quickly in recent years, I think. And the first time I came across this was when a food safety person said, "Oh, you know, you have a brand here called Kilbeggan, but the whiskey is made in Cooley." And he says, "Can you do that?" And I says, "Oh, right, okay." But these were the conventions that had built up over time. I mean, you had Jameson was made in Bow Street. You know, Bow Street was the label on the back, and it was being made down in Middleton. So we got away with it for a while, and Tullamore wasn't even being made in Tullamore. You know, there was a whole raft of different brands that were being, and then more information. So now it's very heavily regulated by making sure that there's very little misleading of the customer. So what's on the label is verified by a lot of people before you can actually get that information or allow that label into the market now. And I think that in some ways that's good. In other ways, it does ties people's hands up a little bit. But, you know, as long as you can verify what you're putting on there, it's fine. You can get away. But the definitions have to be changed. There's all kinds of regulations coming in. We're currently working in the technical file in the technical committee in IBEC in relation to things like rejuvenation of casks. Can you rejuvenate a cask? And can you use a cask? Can you create a sherry cask without having a sherry cask in Jerez? This kind of thing. Can you treat a cask in different ways? The latest one I've heard coming along is, can you use a cider cask? I don't see why not, but in the regulations, these things have to be defined in some way so that you don't get completely off the wall kind of thing. The area of peated, if you put whiskey into a peated cask, it takes up a peated flavor. Can you call it a peated whiskey? You know, and again, this is where regulations and getting your hands tied in some respects, or making sure that the customer gets and understands exactly what they are drinking. The thing about provenance of which distillery did that whiskey come from is a big one in recent years, because a lot of the new distilleries haven't even launched their own whiskies, ourselves and Powerscourt included. Our whiskey that we're producing there for the last 3 years it will only be whiskey in August of this year. So we talked about, you know, the innovation is coming in spirit is about to hit all over Ireland, and it's going to be such an interesting time looking at the new productions, because in the most recent times, a lot of people have been taking whiskey that was produced in Middleton, Bushmills and Cooley, because they were the only distilleries running up till about 2016, and changing them by cask treatments or cask changes, and putting it out as one brand. Not necessarily, but it's not their whiskey. So I think that's the most interesting thing that's coming down the road, is to see what all these other distilleries are going to produce.
So we're going to end up with even more diversity than we have, presumably, with all this happening. And I suppose one underlying question that I would have would be, how do we avoid, one, confusing the consumer by offering too many? And secondly, is it more difficult to define what Irish whiskey is then when the category is so diverse?
I think it's a great thing that it's diverse. Yeah, I think it's, you know, and people and the different distilleries, I feel like even in the past couple of years, are really starting to own their own spaces a lot more. You know, the size of the distilleries are so different from, you know, from your Middleton to your Kilbeggan even, or, you know, there's what we can produce is completely different from each other. And I think maybe 5 years ago, we were all trying to be a certain way. You know, we all tried to fit into a cookie cutter of what Irish whiskey is. Whereas now it's almost like you've, talk about method and madness. We've opened the can of worms, and people are coming out with such incredible ideas and innovations, and that is Irish whiskey. We need to just embrace that.
I'm sure that the genie's out of the bottle now, and
that's the phrase.
In some sense, do you find you're looking over your shoulders now at the competition, at the new entrants, and seeing what they're doing, and saying, "Oh, that's a good idea, maybe." Or do you have your own path?
I would say the opposite to that, Sergio, to be honest. I say the competition's looking over their shoulder at us.
Yeah.
Okay. They see what we're doing and think, well, could we do that, or could we do something like that? I don't think we have anything to hide, or anything anywhere, any other opportunities that might be coming from some other branch of the business. I think we as an industry, the Irish whiskey industry, have all the confidence in the world to plow our own furrow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Over the past few months, my favorite whiskey release so far this year, and Billy, you'll be delighted to hear this, is the Redbreast 10. I think it's a phenomenal whiskey. But for me, it's taking that iconic liquid and that iconic form and not changing much about it, apart from the year and the cask strength element. Is there too much of an emphasis on trying to be different now? Or especially, I suppose it's more maybe for you, Billy, because you have these old iconic brands that if you were to do something different, there'd be an absolute outcry on it. Let's face facts. And maybe that's where the method of madness fits in. I assume that's it. But is it more difficult for you to keep these iconic brands the way they were? Or are you allowed to play around with them to suit the palate that you were talking about earlier, where the consumer is looking for something different?
Yeah, that's a deep question, John. Yeah, but
that's why you're here.
but yeah, look, from my point of view, from the Irish Distillers' point of view, we've got different styles to try and maintain a consistency. Like you've got the Jameson, it's a blend. You've got the Middleton, we've got a blend and a single pot still there, but focused on used ex-bourbon barrels with Powers, which is more distillate driven. We have the Spots, which is various fortified wine casks. We have Redbreast, a defined sherry-driven brand on its own, and like I'm sure Noel and Sarah are the same. Like we're sitting on a lot of trials, a lot of cast trials, a lot of experimental stuff, and you're exactly right, John. That's where method and madness comes in, because a lot of those trials, by definition, because they're trials, it's something, they're different to anything we've done before, and therefore they're not going to fit into the Redbreast style or the Jameson style or the pot style, and that's exactly where method and madness fitted in, because we have many trials ongoing. Some of them work, some of them don't work, but the ones that do work, say, oh, this whiskey's turned out great, and then we kind of look at each other. What are we going to see? Yeah.
We're going to see a peated Redbreast soon.
Yeah, but I mean, I doubt that. But you have all those variations in Jameson, Caskmates, and the like, and Black Barrel and what have you, and you had the different, you had the three different makeups of Jameson as well. The fruity, the mellow, and can't remember the third one there. But maybe
that was we had two. We had the deconstructed Noel. Yeah, yes. that was the bold, the live, and the bold, exactly. The round, and the lively.
I mean, and all of those innovations, I think they or those releases, are just great for the industry, because I mean, we all know of the success of the Jameson brand worldwide, and that has been so important for this industry. Without it, we wouldn't have the
It's
number
opened
of
the doors for everyone else. Yeah.
It absolutely has, as they say, a rising tide, as it were, lifts all boats. And you can't restrict the production to one particular style of whiskey either within the diversity that is Irish whiskey. I mean, thankfully, Irish distillers, had the likes of the Redbreast and the Powers, and Bushmills had Black Bush, which was one of my favorites for many, many years. And you had all of those brands that were there, Paddy and Tullamore, and they were all produced by the one distillery or one unit in Irish Distillers and Bushmills in Middleton. So, I mean, the explosion of these new distilleries is partly because of the success of Jameson, and as well as that, the success of Cooley, insofar as that Cooley was the first real entry into Irish whiskey back in 1989, and it took 20 years for it to be a success, really, and 30 years for it to get where it was to be bought over by someone as iconic as Beam, and then Suntory's involved, and we didn't mention Japanese whiskey either. But that's the other thing. It is important as well for us as blenders and distillers to mix with the guys from other distillery and distilled producing countries, and it's always great, and there's great camaraderie between all of us in Scotland. And when I go to America, and when you go to the Germans have started distilling whiskey, there's Welsh whiskey, and there's how many new whiskies are coming out. It's just and you could see this as well in the international competitions when you go and you see the worldwide whiskies, Australia, New Zealand, Taiwan whiskies. All of these are starting to come in as well. And to think that we can sit on our laurels and the likes of Jameson or the big brands, forget about it. There is a big competition out there, and it's getting more intense. And all of those whiskies, you can see year on year how their qualities are improving and how they're learning. And there was a time when you could only buy a still from Forsyths, and now you have a lot of people in Poland, China making stills and all over. And now Forsyths have an office here in Ireland, and a few other people making stills here in Ireland. So it's great for the industry. It's great, and it's great that the world is such a big place, and there's an awful lot of people out there still don't know about Irish whiskey, believe it or not. But
just speaking for myself, as I'm pretty new to this, but getting to go down to the warehouse like I did today and get cask samples and pilot blending back up in the office, like, that's not pressure. That's the most crack you can have in a 9 to 5,
Don't be telling everyone, Sarah.
You're supposed to tell us how hard work it is.
But some days you're just like,
I know.
you can't wait to get into work and to kind of try different things.
I think somebody touched on it earlier. We were talking about the heritage and the history, tradition of that we have here, and I suppose barring Scotland and perhaps the US, I mean, it is something that is unique to us in the depth of history that we do have. Is that something that is always in your mind, and is it something that you're key to be respectful of, or is it a hindrance as well?
It's never a hindrance. I think it's a great mark, to think that we have that heritage in Ireland, and it's known around the world. But you have to be careful with it. I'll tell you a very quick story about a friend of mine who was in the States and was boasting about the Irish whiskey and what great whiskey we make in Irish. And
Not me, was it? No.
No,
Okay.
But anyway, he happened to be. It could have been even myself. We were in the presence of Fred Noel from Beam, and we were saying, that how we went and taught the Americans how to make whiskey, and Fred went over and took up a sample of Irish whiskey and he tasted it and he puts it down and he says, and the reason it tastes so good is because you use the bourbon barrels. The history of Irish whiskey goes back before bourbon ever existed, and yet this is why nowadays we have to look back and see we rely heavily on bourbon because that's the way the industry has developed. But before that, there was all these sherry casks. That's where Redbreast came out, and the port of other brands as well. And that's the diversity and the beauty of this industry. It goes back years, and there's all kinds of things that we haven't even uncovered in some ways. I think even our good friend Fiona O'Connor, I'd probably be on here at some stage, has researched some of the annals of Irish history and discovered great mash bills that have been forgotten about and lost in time. And some people are reviving some of those, and we will be hopefully able to change these technical restrictions as they were written to accommodate those things, as opposed to, as somebody said earlier, you don't want to over define it. I agree, but you still have to have some definitions, otherwise you're going to have a plethora of things that's not going to be conform and maybe, and there's always the risk of that you have a rogue or a quality issue with whiskey, and that would ruin or potentially ruin things for everyone. So we have to make sure that, there are some boundaries and some umbrella organization that makes, what is kosher and what isn't, kind of thing within the industry, or we do run the risk of something going out of field. And
I think we have to be careful that, we are innovative and are forward thinking, but not at the price of quality, obviously. So an interesting question in here actually from Alan, and he's saying, what are the big brands' thoughts on the growing number of distilleries in Ireland? And while small ones can't really be seen as opposition, do they think it's a good thing overall? I think you've kind of answered that, but maybe a few thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, for me, for sure, no doubt that it's the smaller ones that are, that are really the future. Because innovation is the future of the business. We've established brands, but the consumer is always going to be looking for something different, and the smaller producers getting involved in the industry, because they're new, they're innovating straight away. And it can only pique the interest of a wider a wider band of consumers because of that. So by all means, we encourage the smaller ones, and we're there, and I guess Noel would be in the same boat. Like, they only have to come if they need any advice. Come and ask. We're not going to tell them how to make their whiskey, but there are certain things like, look out for the quality of your casks. Be careful who your cask suppliers are. Because at the end of the day, and we've already just mentioned it, but it's the quality, I think, of the Irish whiskey category across the board. That is the driver of the category. As soon as we allow quality to slip, we could be in trouble.
Well, that's what happened in the past, when Irish whiskey went through all the bad years, just quality was in decline. But there is a great collaboration amongst distilleries in Ireland, and even just on a personal sense, when I was out on the road, I'd pop into one of your talks, Billy, or you'd come up. I remember you coming up to a launch I was doing in New Orleans, and I was showing you around and sampling you out on products. So there's great collaboration going on. But one of the things that I suppose this has piqued in my head is, what we may previously have defined as an Irish whiskey style or Irish whiskey, is that an ever-evolving thing? Is that changing? In 50 years' time, will what we now define as Irish whiskey be something completely different? Will it be a different product? Is that an issue, or is it something we just have to accept is going to happen?
For me, I think it's something that we got to accept is going to happen. My take on it is we have been, and I'm probably the worst in the world for it. We've been sort of around in the business since 1976, but I've been driven by tradition. Whiskey's a traditional business, doesn't change that much. But today, and Noel's already said, like today, the Irish whiskey business is a lot different from it was then. So tradition, who defines tradition? Who starts a tradition? So we could be, we could be actively setting the tradition for 50 years time right now. So that would be my take on it.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, look, language evolves, fashions evolve, and obviously whiskey. That's what's making it so exciting. But I just think the pace of that change now has gone into fifth gear now, which
Ramped
is
up.
interesting.
Yeah, but
I mean,
still it happens slowly. It's like whiskey making it's a slow game. So while it's gathering pace, it is ever changing. Like whiskey that was made 50 years ago, would it be even recognizable as what we think of as Irish whiskey today?
Yeah, I mean, sorry, Sarah, but my I use the analogy of Irish music. Irish music traditionally would be, I don't know, what would you say, the Dubliners or the Clancy Brothers or something like that. But like today, I mean, the Coronas are identifiably an Irish band, and they're still playing Irish music, but it's a completely different style of Irish music, but it's recognizable as Irish.
Yeah. Is there a single DNA then that says, this is Irish whiskey? Is there either an ethos, or is it something in the flavor, or what's the DNA then, despite having such a diverse portfolio within the sector?
Sergio, this is why under the legislation on the GI, the geographical indicator, the technical file, and all that we've kind of tried to capture what is the DNA of Irish whiskey.
Yeah.
For me, I guess there are the classical things like distilling techniques, and we've got double distill and triple distilling and all the rest of it. But one of the main things, and Billy hinted on it there as well, our wood policy in Ireland is very, very strong and very, very powerful, and that is very, very key that we have a good wood policy, that we are on top of what we're putting the whiskey into, And the third thing is we've got a very, very convivial climate that is very, very much good for maturation. Well, should I say different? Because you can look at the likes of how whiskey matures in the hot climates in the summer in America and the very, very cold winters. Or you look at Scotland. I mean, the other day it's still snowing in Scotland and parts of the Highlands and things like that, and you don't get the same chemical reactions going on because the temperature profiles are different. You've got the climate is so important, and Ireland as an island, and being in the Gulf Stream, we've got a nice moderate climate. It goes up and down slowly and regularly, and not too big a swings, and that seems to give us a style of whiskey. And if that was to be the DNA of Irish whiskey, it's certainly not maybe all of it, but it's part of it. I think this is very important, and that's why the geographical thing about Ireland and Irish whiskey, that's one explanation for it. I'm sure Billy and Sarah would have other ideas, perhaps, or John.
Yeah, I'd have to totally agree with you there. The climate is a big thing. It means that we know what to expect from our maturation. So, and then whenever you combine that with the quality of the cask that we're putting into our warehouses, we know pretty well, we with good certainty, no guarantees, but we know pretty well how those casks are going to perform over the years in the warehouse. I think that's one of the biggest things that we have. Like, I mean, all our own brands have their own DNA, but if the question is Irish whiskey as a whole, does it have a DNA? I think it's down to those two things.
And Sarah,
does terroir come into that?
No.
So sorry, just to pip in, I totally agree with Noel on and both on kind of the factors that make Irish whiskey what it is, and always the phrase when I think about the climate in Ireland, the phrase "today's rain is tomorrow's whiskey" really hits home on a January morning when you're looking out the window. So we see how important that is, and the kind of the dry spells and the heat spells that we've had over the past number of years, and how important our water supply is, and how vital the water that we're using is as well to the flavor of Irish whiskey. So
yeah, we take those things for granted. I think sometimes, we take our climate for granted, and curse at our rain, I think, quite often. But look, it gives us fantastic whiskey.
Sorry, just moving on from that, Sergio. And it was really maybe something more for Sarah, because with the more diverse portfolio under your from peated malt to to pot still to single malt to single grain to blends, all Irish whiskies. But, is there something running between them apart from the fact that they're distilled on Ireland and they adhere to all the technical? Is there something there amongst them all that is that key DNA, that is that Irishness?
I think so. I think there's some flavour notes that, moving from Scotland to Ireland and kind of having that as almost the backbone of my nose and my sensory experience. I vividly remember the first time I tried a cask sample of our pot still, the Quebecan pot still that we ended up releasing a few years later. Yeah. And I was so confused. My nose just couldn't. And I remember I was standing in my office. I don't know if I ever told you this, but I was standing in my office and I was like, do I like it? Do I love it? Or is it am I just so confused? I ended up having to, throughout the course of a week, go back and back again and back again. And then I ended up taking a small cask sample home just to kind of drink it like a consumer, to try kind of to get my head around it. And that note I find so often throughout all the different whiskies that I try, not even Cooley or Quebecan, but I keep coming back to it. I keep on when I'm kind of, drinking a dram with a friend or a flight of whiskies in a bar or something like that. I get that note. I can't even put my finger on what it is, but it is definitely a pot still, and it comes from the kind of the barley, I think. I call it a green grassy note, but sure, we all smell everything differently. But there's something that goes through so many of the different distillates that I've tried. So I wonder, do you? Sorry.
There's one question that keeps on propping up actually as well in terms of, and this one is coming up about terroir.
Drop the grenade.
Yeah, so I'd just be interested to see how your thoughts maybe align or differ in terms of significance of it, whether it exists or whether it is a significant influence. And obviously Ireland has great growing conditions, so.
Yeah, okay, I'll take that one first.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any doubt that there has to be some credence given to terroir. No doubt, because like it's in everything that grows in the ground. It takes the influence of whatever the soil is that it's growing in, and how does that translate then from the soil to the barley through fermentation, distillation? I think okay, there's evidence, there's studies being done there, but I just don't know how relevant it's going to be in the final product. That's my take on it.
Mm-hmm.
I think as well, like when I think people ask, quite a lot, like, so what's the difference between double distilled and triple distilled in a flavor profile? And for me, the character of a distillate and the flavor that you're going to get in your distillery, it's such an additive process. You get it from how you've milled your grain to the temperature of the water in the mash tun and your method of wort separation, the whole way through to your heads cuts. That it's something that can't be replicated within distilleries. It's unique to your own distillery. So Cooley malt is apples and almonds and marzipan as it ages and it gets sweeter. But I really struggle. And actually, I'd love, Noel and Billy, if you could give me some advice maybe on how to answer that question, because people say, so where do the apples come from? And I'm like, oh, crikey, I don't know. Like, it's just there. It's always there. It's what it is. It's the process. So what do you say when people say, where does this particular flavor come from?
Sarah, I mean, I have had that same conundrum as well, and yet you can get into the chemistry of these things and spend an absolute fortune rooting down and to find out where this flavor is coming from, and that's the beauty of Irish of whiskey in general. But and it's true as well. I mean, we could build a replica of Cooley or a replica of Powerscourt in the field next door, and there's no way you're going to make the same spirits. And that's just the beauty of this industry as well. There are so many variables that you try to control. You know the main ones to give you the good quality spirit, but there's always some little thing. The sanitation, there's more lactic acid in one fermentation or in one particular fermentation because it's at the end of the distillery or whatever, or the distillation is slightly different for some reason or another. The water is different. Terroir, I go back to that. That was the question. I can't say that definitively because I don't know enough about it whether or not it makes a huge difference. But I would expect that it can have some changes in the barley that it's producing. But does it pass all the way through the processes that we have? Perhaps. And again, it's interesting to see what will come out of that whole discussion. When we've only got a couple of malting plants in the country at the moment. I think that's not a great thing either, because we need a little bit more diversity and different styles of malting. I mean, there's so many things you can do with the malt. Never mind terroir, and innovation is going on in that area as well. The varieties of barley change every year. I mean, that's just the way it happens. And then you have people that are bringing in the rye and pot still combinations. They will have bigger impacts on the spirit than the terroir.
I think there's too many moving parts that that it's impossible to replicate the same thing 100% batch from batch, year from year. You can do it to 99.9% or whatever, but it's impossible to replicate everything. The temperature outside, how quickly did the still go up to a certain thing, exact same time for the cut. And I think it's yes, I understand how terroir, and soil and growth coming from a farm that, barley in this field is slightly different to barley in that field. But I find it difficult to how it's coming out at the end to be completely contrasting. But
every year's production of barley is different, and and yet the challenge for us as whiskey producers is to make sure that we have a consistent product at the end of the day. That people can stand over the whiskey from one year to the next and say, well, that's Jameson, that's the same Jameson I was drinking last year and the year before and for many years back. Now, of course, things move and change slightly from one year to the next. And that's why the likes of Billy and Sarah and myself, we are there to try and smooth out the ups and downs from one production to the other. We either add a little bit more different bourbon or second fill or third fill, and we bring things back into balance. That's the art of the blender, and a good blender will always be able to do that with the whiskey. But when you throw in the terroir and you say, okay, well, produce a whiskey from a field of barley this year, it'll be different next year, no doubt about it, because there was a drought one year there a while ago, and the nitrogen contents were changed in the field and in the barley that was produced, and the malt was different. The variety of malt, you're going to keep the malt variety the same year in, year out. So there's so many things. I'm not saying that there isn't an influence from terroir. There could well be. I
think it comes down to a lot of curiosity in all produce, I suppose, that's coming out now. In terms of, you go to your butcher, you want to know where your meat came from. I think it's as much about provenance as opposed to maybe the effect that it might have. You'd like to know maybe you're helping a local farmer as opposed to somewhere. I think that's the bigger thing than the flavor impact, perhaps.
You're absolutely right there, Sergius. It's more down to the agriculture and the people in the agricultural industry that that terroir is important. But Noel is spot on there and said, like, the blender, that's what we do. It's try and keep flavors consistent. So terroir is really not going to have any influence on what we in particular are going to do. Now, it may be important to other people, but certainly it's something that we want to negate any variables whenever we're doing our job.
I suppose now, unfortunately, we're coming close to the end of this tonight. But one of the things, and that really threw the thought into my head, that concept of your job is to ensure consistency. What is the most important role for you guys within your day-to-day working environment?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the sensory side is very important, for sure. But the most important thing that I do day to day is plan for the future. Okay. You got to line up all your ducks well in advance. Like I'm working on we're trying to build a new planning model at the minute. So we're looking at 40 years into the future. So I'm looking at I'm asking for sales forecasts out to the year 2061 at the minute, but you've got to do that. You really have got to do that. I use Redbreast 27 as the example. Like, if you've got a core brand that's 27 years old, it means that you already have to have made the next 27 years worth of it. So you need to know how much is being demanded. On top of that, that's only the inventory that we've already made and is already maturing. Kevin O'Gorman, the master distiller, needs to know what his distillery is going to be producing, what the demands are going to be in the distillery for the next 10 years. So in fact, what I'm effectively doing is trying to predict in 10 years' time how much 27-year-old whiskey am I going to have in the warehouse. Now, thankfully, I'll not have to worry about that when the time comes. But, that takes the forecast window for that one brand out to 37 years.
Billy, can I just pick you up on that then quickly? How accurate were the forecasts from when you started? So when you start up, did the forecasts foresee this explosive growth and interest in Irish whiskey?
Well, that's a really good question, Sergius, because we are constantly reviewing forecasts. And generally, when we're running forecast scenarios, we do a kind of a realistic one, a pessimistic one, and an optimistic one.
Yeah. And
I mean, you can guess over the past number of years, sometimes the optimistic one didn't even cover what the sales in the next year were going to be. So and that's the speed of the growth of the category. So
it's amazing when you think about it, though. Really,
Yeah.
And
for me,
I'm sure it's similar. Yes, similar for Sarah and Noel. Sorry, Sarah. So because you have aged products and you've some nice aged liquids and Cooley, but also then I suppose with recent phenomenal consumer response to things like Kilbeggan pot still or Kilbeggan small batch rye, does that then come into play and kind of go, well, we have to now actually be looking at this because people are looking for it?
Yeah, constantly. For me, it's what problem is future Sarah going to have to solve in a year and a half time? Where are the pinch points in production that we couldn't account for when it was being distilled? So yeah, it's kind of planning for the future, understanding your stock well enough to know that when you're coming to fill a vat or to kind of to pick cask or draw up a picking list, know what decisions you're making today are going to affect you tomorrow and when you're going to be cursing yourself. And then for me, the other side of it is new mix spirit quality. I think just underpins every single thing that we're doing in the distillery. So just always been able to kind of to keep as close as possible to that and keep as close an eye as possible. So those two things, present Sarah and future Sarah.
Yeah, which I suppose will leave me on with Noel, because Noel, the world is your oyster, so to speak, because you helped build this new distillery in Powerscourt. You're instrumental in getting it up and running, and you've started decide. You basically and your team have decided what to distill. So what comes into your thought process when you're starting from scratch, essentially?
I have the beauty of having done it before.
Yeah.
And it's when you start, you don't realize that you are doing exactly what Billy says. You're looking 10 years into. If you want to launch a 10-year-old product, you have to make it now. Mm-hmm. And you won't be launching in 10 years. You'll be launching maybe in 11 years, because by the time you get to 10 years, that's just the nature mm-hmm. of the game. And then you have to suss out, well, how much of this am I going to launch? How much am I going to sell every year? And that mm-hmm. dictates how you build your inventory. So there's nobody going to start off and sell. And I think this was one of the big learnings we had in Cooley when we started off. We rushed into producing as much spirit as the plant could possibly make, not realizing that, in 4 years' time, if we don't sell it at 4-year-old, we have to wait till it's 5 or 6. And one of the reasons that we have some of these great old whiskies is because we didn't sell it when it was 4-year-old.
Yeah.
Ultimately, and this is how Billy is laughing there, but I know exactly where he is and where Sarah is. You have to aim for your core brand, like Kilbeggan, the blend. That's your big volume seller. If you got your forecast right, you're going to end up using all the whiskey that you make for it. But you never will get it right. In 1 year it'll be up, 1 year it'll be down. You say it's 5% growth, and it ends up as being 10% growth. So you produce more than you expect you're going to need, and that gives you the diversity to bring out these other side products. So Jameson Castmates wouldn't be there if Jameson sold all of the whiskey for Jameson, because it just wouldn't happen. Yeah. Yet they're able to keep up supply and demand. And then you get the beautiful other controller of the whole thing, when the demand is so much greater. So in Cooley, we had this with Connemara. We were running out of the stock. We didn't have enough of it to supply the demand. That's when you put it on allocation and you put the price up, and that's when everybody gets. But it causes problems for the consumer, and you want to be able to give everybody what they have. But there are levers that you can use, and don't put all your eggs in one basket. Is a big thing. Have a few things to look at it that you can have, and of course, if you're aiming at having a 4-year-old blend, you're also going to end up with something older down the road, because you're not going to sell it all at the age you expect to sell it.
Yeah. If you wouldn't mind, I know we're coming close to the end, but really, I'd love to finally get your thoughts, if you wouldn't mind, on what is the future of Irish whiskey, and what's exciting you about what's coming down the road.
I'll just go and get my crystal ball, will I?
Yeah. Well, you have 30-year forecasts and up to 2061, so it should be no problem.
Go for it, Billy.
Well, I mean, what's coming down the road is Noel's pretty spot on there when he says, "I'll go and get the crystal ball." But it is going to be driven by consumers, and we've got to be able, and I mentioned it before, we got to be able to maybe change direction a little bit if needs be, if we see consumer trends going a certain direction. I mean, personally, I think as a category, the Irish category is going to be competing on a more level playing field with Scotch. I think we're going to be up there with the Scotch category, an equal measure, going back to the way things used to be in the distant past. That's what I would like to see for the category. I'd also like to see Redbreast selling 1 million cases.
Well,
I'll keep drinking it. It'll get there.
Yeah. We'll hit 1 million then. John, if you do.
Haven't a quick look at my crystal ball over here. I think the big thing, and I mentioned this earlier as well, is going to be what these new distilleries are going to produce in the next 5 to 10 years. That is going to be so interesting, and see if they have different innovative products and what the product quality is going to be like from these guys, and ourselves included in Powerscourt, of course, because that's where the diversity is coming from, and that's where we're all going to be looking and seeing, well, which and unfortunately some of these guys aren't going to survive. It's just the nature of the business and business in general. COVID has had a big hit on some people more than others, and who knows what's around the next corner. But I think that for me, the interesting time ahead is to see what all our colleagues that have started up new distilleries in all parts of the country, what their products are going to be like. I think the Jemiesons and the Tullamores and the Kilbeggans are stable and growing and spreading the word of Irish whiskey all over the world in greater measure. And there is no doubt that Scotch are worried. But again, when you're at the top of the heap, there's only one where to go. So hopefully Ireland and Irish whiskies will continue to blossom, and I'm sure it will. And I think it's an interesting time ahead.
Yeah.
Sarah, finally, you might give us your thoughts.
Yeah.
Same. I think, like I said before, distillate character, technical distilling is going to come really to the fore. Hopefully a lot of integrity as well would be great. But I just think I'm just so excited. I think it's going to be a hell of a journey. The next 10, 15 years are going to be a really interesting time in Irish whiskey. And I can't wait to try as much different distillates as possible, different expressions.
Well, look, when we all gather here in 2061, probably on some holographic podcast, or we might beam you up or something. It'd be great to share what's happened. Yeah. Well, we'll have a clone of ourselves or something like that. Look, it's been an absolute pleasure and a joy to have you as guests. I mean, I'm so in awe of the work you do and the contribution you make, and it was really fantastic to get the insights that you provided us with. So let's look forward to meeting in person and sharing a few drams together then. So thank you very much for being our guest.
Thank you all.
Thanks for having us, guys. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Not yet.
So
Brilliant.
Well, I suppose we'll get rid of Noel as well. John, I mean, that was a fascinating insight. Really, I mean, there was a bit of diversity in the thoughts as well, which I really enjoyed. And look, it just whets my appetite for the next show as well. But perhaps you want to have a look with our guest here. If you have enjoyed the show, ladies and gentlemen, please do subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have a series of these coming up. And the next one actually is Irish whiskey, how new distilleries are shaking things up. And our panel next week will be Alex Cunningham from Slane Distillery, Graham Cool from Dingle, Conor Farrell, brand ambassador from Pierce Lyons, and Laura Hemme from Rowe & Co. Distillery. So, wow. I mean, that's going to be something exciting to look forward to, John, yeah?
Oh, definitely. No, we've got, I mean, these series of chats, we've really got the some of the creme de la creme from the Irish whiskey industry. So look, we're here to just try and get as much information out of them as possible and throw in little grenades from time to time, eh, Sergius?
Yeah, well, you're no better man. Look, everybody, thank you very much for joining us. And we really hope you enjoyed the show. We look forward to next week and we'll keep you posted. And thanks for joining. Stay safe, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.